Good morning, good evening, brothers. Yeah. We're very fortunate this evening to have a special guest, Christopher Veal. And I'm going to call, if Carlton, can you introduce our guest for this evening for the Real Dads Club?
Yes, sir. With the permission that Brother Veal gave me, he told me that we could keep it brief. Um, so he's a writer, he's a speaker. One thing that stuck out to me in reading some of his work is using the word vulnerability throughout some of the information that I saw. And so he told me I could keep it simple. And of course, he's on the West Coast. And and he's going to share with us. And I will say this, Brother Veal, we've been kind of talking about being vulnerable. So seeing that word was really good. And for the last few weeks, we've been writing love letters to ourselves and forgiveness letters to ourselves, being vulnerable with ourselves. So we're excited to have you, brothers. Give it up for Christopher Veal.
Okay, first of all, I got to tell you, I love that you've been writing those letters, right? Okay, so the fact that there are men doing that gives me hope. First of all, because like growing up, I never would have heard of people doing that. So that just has me going like, all right, I already know that I'm glad I said yes to Uncle Mike because you all know he's persuasive. um, so yes, thank you. You know what? The theme that we came up with when I was talking with Uncle Mike was this idea of vulnerability in relationships. So yes, we are going to talk about the word vulnerability. And I know that a lot of the times as men, we often think of vulnerability as a 4-letter word that we don't say in mixed company. And I believe we need to change the way that we hold that word. And so one of the things I also want to tell you is this is going to be less me talking at you and more me talking with you. I want this to be a dialogue. I'm going to share a little bit about my story and my journey to give some context of where I'm coming from with this. But I want this to be a dialogue and us to have a conversation because one of the things that I've learned in all this time is I don't have all the answers. I don't know it all. But the more I'm in conversation with people, the more we shift the way we think about things and we see things in different light. So what I'm hoping is that by the end of this, our time tonight, that you have a new outlook on what the word vulnerability means for you and maybe are clearer on what it means for you because there's also no one right definition. So where do I want to start? There's a couple places. Hearing y'all share as you started too, I was like, man, all those things I want to say. I'm like, maybe I want to just throw those out and improvise, but we're gonna kind of dance with things too. But when Uncle Mike reached out to me and asked me to come join you all here, I had to say yes because one of the most important roles that I have and that I'm proud of is being a dad. I have a daughter who's 14. She's in her freshman year of high school. She's my world. That's just the plain and simple truth. And in my journey, I've become a big advocate for wanting to support fathers. I'm going to share a little bit about my story and that journey with it. But I know it also stems from growing up. I was raised by a single mother. And so my father wasn't really in my life from the time when I was 4 years old when they divorced, my parents divorced, until he died when I was 13. I could count on one hand the number of times I had interactions with him. And I don't think any of them were positive. So I knew that when I was going to become a father one day, I was really going to lean into this and own it in a way that my child was never going to doubt that I was there and a part of their life. So I just say that. And also what I know is one of the challenges that we face, especially when we talk about this idea of vulnerability, and we're going to unpack that a little bit tonight. A lot of our culture and our society in the US considers dads as second-class citizens. I experienced it firsthand when I was working to take paternity leave when my daughter was born. I see dads struggle with it constantly. I know out here in California where I'm living now, there are guys that I talk to regularly that anytime they have interactions with the legal system, like they're treated as the other. And that just doesn't seem right to me. So yes, big fan of fathers, and I'm happy to be here in support of y'all as well. So I do want to share a little bit about my backstory to give you some context of where I'm coming from. And I know Mike put together a really cool little graphic and stuff, but when I got out of college, I ended up going to the Marine Corps, and I spent 9 years on active duty in the Marine Corps. Did a tour in Iraq, not a place I would recommend visiting for vacation. There's far better places to go. But when I got out of the Marine Corps, I went into construction, which was a job that I say fit my skills, but didn't feed my soul. But it was a great chapter in my life because when I was doing that job was when I became a father. And I talk a lot about kind of how we hold masculinity as an impact on things. So I was working in a construction job as a project manager, and a lot of the guys that I was working with were a generation older than me. And when I said I was going to be taking leave when my daughter was born, there were a lot of guys that would make comments like, "What are you doing taking maternity leave?" Or "Don't you know that raising kids is women's work?" And I had a fellow coworker who was about my age, was having a kid as well. And I saw him succumb to some of that pressure. But I wasn't willing to do that because, as I said, I knew what it was like to grow up without a father being present. And so I really pushed back on that and caught a lot of flack, I would say, from some of my coworkers. Some were understanding, but a lot of them just, they couldn't understand. And in hindsight now, I'm not mad at them because they were operating off the examples they had seen. And that's something we're going to talk about as well tonight. You know, the fathers of a generation before were operating off the examples of masculinity and manhood and caregiving that they saw. And so that's part of how we shift the narrative of things. But I spent the time in construction. I pushed back against the system and I decided to take that time off. And I will say that that 6 weeks that I took after my daughter was born, I would not trade for the world. You know, I wish I could have done it more. Um, Unfortunately, the US is one of the only first world countries and industrialized nations in the world that doesn't have more paternity leave and paid paternity leave as a national requirement, which is an entirely different tragedy, but we're not going to talk about that tonight. So I will say, if y'all haven't heard of it, there's a program called Boot Camp for New Dads. And I discovered that when I was about to become a father. Greg Bishop is the man that started it. And I love him for it because in the short version, they bring in veteran dads who are guys that come in with their babies. It's a 3-hour workshop, and it was the best 3 hours I spent in my preparation for becoming a dad. But then they bring in what we call rookie dads. And these are the guys that are anywhere from like 1 to 3 months away from becoming a dad for the first time. And those guys get to ask the questions that they're afraid to ask in other places, in front of their partners, in front of their spouses, at the doctor's office. And they get to see dads being dads. And those rookie dads leave with so much more confidence about this role they're going to take as fathers that, like, I just knew when I went through as a rookie dad, I'm like, I am hooked on this stuff. And I ended up helping and volunteering, facilitating their workshops for close to a decade after that. And I just share that because if you ever encounter dads or guys that are about to become dads, check out Boot Camp for New Dads. And they have a program called Boot Camp for New Moms. And one of the things they also do is they also talk about how do you communicate better as new parents, because I think that's an important piece that we often overlook. But that's also what really helped me lean into, I have a place as a father and I shouldn't be relegated to that second class status. So that really shaped how I started to show up in this. When I left the construction job, I got into organizational development and learning and development work, which is where I found the stuff that I love doing. So doing training and things in organizations, but I also find my way to coaching, which is really my primary job that I do now. Is I do coaching with leaders from all kinds of industries and from all places around the world. I do training in organizations, and I love the work that I get to do because I get to help them be better versions of themselves. And I especially love when I get to work with men that are also fathers, because I can relate to the struggles that they often have about how do I balance the work that I'm doing and how do I struggle like taking care of my family, right? You know, just like William was sharing, trying to struggle like I've got this job, but I'm also trying to be a dad, a single dad, and how do I make that happen? So, what else do I want to share about myself to give some context? Back in 2015, I did a program, a leadership program. And when I came out of it, one of the things that I really started to lean into was exploring what this idea of vulnerability meant for me. Because up until that point in my life, I didn't even think about it. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't have even been a word in my vocabulary. But I started to get curious about what got in the way of me being vulnerable, and in particular, being vulnerable around other men. And in certain cultures and communities, that's amplified even more. You know, when I think about some of the Latin communities, and I've interviewed men from all walks of life, sometimes culturally in the Black community, like outwardly facing, we sometimes don't show vulnerability. And at home, it's very different. But the portrayal that the media often has is a very different story. And so I started exploring this and started interviewing men back in 2016. And I've probably interviewed several hundred, if not thousands of men around this. And one of the questions I often ask is, what gets in the way of you being more vulnerable? And just stand by, because I'm going to be asking you all that question here in a little bit. But as I continue to explore this idea of vulnerability, it started to expand. And what I first thought, and if you haven't heard of Brene Brown, she does a lot of work around this as well, although she focuses a lot on women, or initially did. And so I got wondering, well, nobody's talking about guys with this stuff. And so why is that? And as I said, started interviewing men and just getting curious. And what I found is initially I thought nobody's going to want to talk about this. But what I realized is there are a lot of guys that want to, but they just don't feel safe talking about it because we don't see the examples of it. And so that had me continue to lean in. It manifested in a few different ways. So I started a podcast in 2020 called The Vulnerable Man, still going on. Last year, 2 years ago, sorry, it's 2024 now. In 2022, I published a book called The Whole Man Evolving Masculinity, because I also want to look at what does it mean to have healthy masculinity. I don't like the word toxic masculinity in our world. And I was really curious about how do we bring about more healthy masculinity. And one of the biggest reasons for that, for writing that book and continuing to do this work, is because my daughter, as I said, my 14-year-old daughter, and I want to be a part of creating a world where she experiences more healthy masculinity and doesn't always have to walk around in fear of how men might show up and how they might be. So I'm just checking in and seeing if there's anything else that's real relevant now to say. And I think that probably gives you a little bit of context. One of the things that I appreciate is sometimes people hear, all right, former Marine, construction, so they automatically have a presumption of who I am. And if you hadn't heard the topic of our conversation today, you might have done the same thing. And then I get to show up and bring some vulnerability, and it has people kind of sit back and go, whoa, wait a minute, what? And when they see that I can do it, it has them kind of go, well, wait a minute, if this guy can do it, why can't I? And that's what I love, where I get to start the conversation. And so that's where we're going to start the conversation right now. As I said, this is not going to be me just talking at you, but I would love to hear from some of y'all, what comes to mind when you hear the word vulnerability. So this is the first interactive part, in case you all didn't know. So when you hear vulnerability, what comes to mind?
Being soft.
Okay. What else?
I would think, because I'm added in your former Marine and your construction worker persona, you're not afraid to say that you're tough, right? And you're not to say that you're afraid to do hard work, and you've done it for 9 years. But the vulnerable part would probably be like, why did you have to do some of those things? You're probably more vulnerable with explaining, some of the harshness that you had to see. It's easy to say that you've seen a lot, but it's harder to be vulnerable and say, I can't believe I had this moral conflict. I can only assume it because you're a Marine. I was in the Air Force, so I also know that, we have to protect ourselves and be vulnerable, but also be forthcoming because we want to be truthful. So you're an honest man.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank
What
you for your
else?
service.
Yeah. Thank you. What about for you personally, when you hear the word vulnerability? What does it mean to you?
Expressing emotions.
Okay.
I think there's certainly a level of vulnerability when your emotions don't always fit that limited range that they allow. Society sort of allows for men. So you could be mad, you could be, happy, you could be a number of different things, but you can't be hurt. You can't, feel betrayed and express that with sadness. Sometimes, we talk about in this group, you often don't feel comfortable saying to another man, I love you, and
Yeah.
not being, not have to put something on the end of it to emphasize the masculinity
Right.
aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I think of vulnerability, I think of, first of all, I realize that I'm not going to be vulnerable with anyone and everyone.
Absolutely.
So those that I want to be vulnerable with, they're going to see my authentic self, right? They're going to see my strength, my weaknesses. They're going to see, feel my pain. They're going to feel my joy, and I trust them with it. And I find that especially in my marriage, the more vulnerable I am, the more vulnerable my significant other is. And so therefore we're not guessing, you
Mhm.
know, when I'm tired, I could tell her. And I wasn't always like that. Like it actually came out through a therapy sessions many years ago where my therapist said, Mike, why are you trying to be so strong? Why are you trying to cover everything? And that was a big shift for me. And then and it worked out well because I didn't realize how much I was missing out because I wasn't coming, showing up with my authentic self with my significant other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
Yeah.
wanted to say, when I think of vulnerability, I think Uncle Mike kind of touched on this a little bit. I think of honesty and being true.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm gonna stand for is I'm not worried about us having one definition that fits everybody because we're all different, right? But some of the things like Joaquin, you said, sometimes people see it as softness, right? That's often the way we think of it. Um, you've all likely heard of it, whether you know it by that name or not, or you've experienced like that man box culture. There's certain ways we have to show up as a man, right? It's the I have to be strong. I can never show weakness. I can't ask for help. I have to win at all times. I must conquest sexually, like all the things that we check off. And I can only, as you said, I think, Ron, only certain emotions can be shown. I can be angry. That's acceptable to a degree. I can be happy and maybe a little bit sad, but only in certain places. And so we suddenly get limited in how we can show up. And here's the thing: we're human, right? We have emotions. But when you look at the examples you had growing up, I'm guessing most men didn't have examples of men that were able to show a broad range of emotions. And so what do we do as young boys? We pattern what we see in those men that are in our lives, whether it's our fathers, our uncles, grandfathers, the men in our lives, or for me, because I didn't have a father figure growing up, a lot of what I saw in the media. So I was born in 1971, grew up watching a lot of TV in the late 70s, early 80s. Who were the guys that I saw on TV? Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Charles Bronson, Chuck Norris, right? What do those guys all have in common? Nobody ever beats them, right? Big, tough men. And so that becomes that's what I've got to be a man. And so we also have to look at what are the examples that we're showing. Now, let me ask you this. If a good buddy of yours shared with you, hey, you know what? I'm struggling with this thing, and I just wanted to tell you that. What would you think of him?
Yeah, I would think that he trusted me.
Yeah. What else?
Well, I mean, today's Puma,
Yeah.
I would think that he values me. He knows I can help him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would see him also
I
as,
would think,
go ahead, brother.
I'm sorry, I would, he would really just needed to get something off his chest to make it feel make the world a little bit lighter, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody looks for advice. Some people just, like I said, just talk just to talk sometimes. That's also very therapeutic to release.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Mike?
Yeah, I agree with everyone, but I would also add, I would see him as someone with a lot of courage and a lot of strength, that he's willing to open up. It takes a lot of courage. If someone shares something with me, it took them a lot of courage to come out and to say what they had to say and not to hide
Yeah.
behind a mask.
Anything else anybody wants to share about that?
Yeah,
We're good. Yeah.
I would feel definitely honored because I know he's being vulnerable and he feels safe with with me. So that's how I would feel.
Yeah. And one of the themes I hear, and so I love the responses you gave, and it's also similar. So as I said, I've been interviewing men for the last 8 years. And when I ask that question, the common themes are a lot of what you said. I'd feel like he trusted me. I'd feel respect for him. I'd be proud of him, like a lot of those themes. And it's funny how when we see vulnerability in other people, we point to how it's a strength, it's an asset. Yet when we think about vulnerability in ourselves, what do we often do?
Think of it as weakness.
right? You know, when I ask men what gets in the way for you, it's I'm worried about being seen as not man enough, soft, weak, worried about being judged. And so part of what I'm curious about is how do we shift the conversation so that we naturally see vulnerability as a strength in others, but why does it get in the way for us? And I don't have that answer, but like, I'm curious, what do you all think?
I
I
think
think, I think sometimes where we grow up at, we're all products of our environment.
Absolutely.
So, I'm coming from Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, do or die, and all that. So we had a certain type of image that
Yeah.
we hold. So, you know, weakness, weak link is
Yep.
vulnerability. So, you know, we couldn't be like that. We had to
Yeah.
fake it sometimes, even, put like Brother Mike said, put that mask on and hold it down. We could not be the weak link. So that's how I see it.
Yep. Yeah. What else?
Well, Jimenez, you was gonna say something.
I was going to say that it really depends on how you look at vulnerability, um, and what you're feeding into, because certain people can be vulnerability can also be a power asset. I can have my closest enemy sit at the same table as me and he not make a move on my life or touch any money, whatever. But somebody on the side, or somebody that's not so close to me, may stab me in the back, because there is that saying that keep your enemies close.
Right.
Keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. So it could also be looked as a power move. At the same time, I don't want to be caught sleeping, or lacking with anything, because who wants to be caught off guard? So that's all I got to say.
Okay. Tyrone, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was amazed at the question because I was like thinking about it from an outside perspective, but then from the inside, I was like, it's a good question because as I was listening to it and looking at how I hide my vulnerable statements, because I use a lot of words, was you can listen to other opinion, but vulnerability also it hides the fact that maybe some of the things you don't know and some of the things you disagree with. So maybe there's also some displacement in being vulnerable because you might hear something like, nah, that's not me.
Mm-hmm.
But it might be exactly who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanna come back to what you said a moment ago, Doug. And I absolutely accept, like, and realize where you grew up, and apologize. That's my dog in the background if you heard him. Where you grow up and your environment absolutely shapes things, right? You know, and how do we start showing different ways that we can show up as men? So I'm guessing, regardless of where you grew up, like if it was like, hey, you know what, it was survival in the streets every day, those boys that you ran with, like you were tight and you knew you would go to the mat for them. You know, I think about my time in the Marine Corps. There's a guy that I served with, and if he called me up right now and said, pack your bags, we're going, I'd say, got that. I don't even need to know where we're going or how long we're going to be gone. That's how much respect I have for him. That's how much I've got his back. There's somebody else that I served with. If they called me and said, hey, Christopher, I'm in town next week, want to grab coffee? I'd be like, ooh, I'm getting my hair done. Sorry, I can't make it. Right. But what I know is we have that feeling of connection, even if we don't express it. And what I'm saying is, even for you, regardless of those examples that you had growing up, like that connection's there, even if you couldn't say, I love you. That feeling's there. We say it other ways as men because we feel like if I say it, then I'm soft. I'm losing face, right? but we know that at the core, that's how we feel about each other. And that's part of what I love getting at and say, like, how do we shift that? Because you know what it feels like to love another man. And there's like, it's nothing sexual, but like you have that deep love for someone, but why can't we say it? Right. And I come back to what are the examples that we see growing up? You know, you look at men in the media, right? Look at a lot of the TV shows, the movies we watch. Very typical. There's like this alpha male, or there's a certain way that they show up, and you don't often see men that are emotionally intelligent or are open to talking about their emotions. They're usually the comic sidekicks, right? Or they're like that afterthought. Paul, what you got?
Hey everybody, I'm sorry. Turn
Oh,
my
no
camera on.
worries.
Turn my camera on.
Welcome.
No, I think it's very interesting because we do see in media and just all around us that perception of what a man is.
Mhm.
But then as you're talking, I also start to reflect and I ask myself, where did this come from, right?
Yep.
And for us, particularly in America, like where did this concept of what a man is that we saw growing up,
Mhm.
where did it come from? Why was it? Not why was it? It was perpetuated and disseminated down to us.
Mhm.
And then we grow up internalizing this is what a man is supposed it's supposed to be. And I was talking to these gentlemen from Nigeria, and we had a conversation, and their conversation was so eye-opening because their perception of what a man is was innately different from my American perception.
Yeah.
And as you're talking, I start to realize it's not just like the environmental factors in the neighborhood I grew up in, but then there's this whole entire system that's constructed that says a man has to be this,
Yes.
right? And when I say that, I want to say it with the caveat of it's like as you're a man, you're not supposed to cry, right? But on the flip side, we have tear ducts for a reason. Like you hit your hand, you slam your hand in the door, like, and this, like, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to cry. When I feel pain, but when I feel pain, I'm supposed to have some sort of reaction, right? And everything from how we're supposed to take care of our families, and I think Uncle Mike alluded to this multiple times, how we're supposed to be tough and how it's the weirdest phenomenon. But from New York to California, you meet a man, they're going through something, and we all say, "Nah, I'm good. I'm all right.
Yep.
I'm good. I'm all right." It was like, my dad wasn't there. So I don't know where that came from, how it was innately ingrained in me to say, I'm all right when I'm not.
Yeah. What I'm guessing is you saw those examples, even if it wasn't your dad, like other men, right? And that's part of it. So there's so much in what you said there that we could go on for days. Here's what I really want to emphasize in this, though. This is part of why we're having this conversation, is because that's how we start to shift the narrative. Now, let me be clear. And Uncle Mike, you pointed something earlier. I like to talk about what I call appropriate vulnerability. So I don't walk around and in every conversation share everything about me, because that ain't right. And not everybody deserves to hear that from me. Like there's certain people that I can be more vulnerable than others. But what I'm a big stand for is we often walk around constantly like, nope, I'm good and I don't need to share anything. And like I said, we're all human. We got struggles. But where are there places where we can open up a little bit more? Doesn't need to be every deep, dark secret that you're struggling with. But just as like we heard when William first came in was like struggling with something, I'm guessing there's nobody on this call that was like, I think less of him because of it. I know for myself, I was like, man, I'm not going through your situation, but I feel you. And I felt more connected to him. And for me, that's why I think us exploring what vulnerability means for us individually is why it's important, right? Because if you can start to lean a little bit more, what I've discovered is it creates deeper connection. And I didn't believe that at first. I told myself the lies of the man box. Like, I can't do that because I'm going to be seen as less than, or people aren't going to, treat me with respect. And it's been the exact opposite that I've found, that when I'm willing to do that, people feel more connected. They feel more human with me, and they often open up as well. And we see the humanity in each other.
Christopher, thank you so much. We have a few brothers. I just want to see how they're how's this sitting with them? Keith, if
Yeah.
you have anything you want to weigh in, Adisha or
Yeah, comments or questions, feel free to jump in.
Elvin.
How you doing?
Welcome.
I'm just coming in. I had an amazing week. I'm just keyed in because I got my first grandson. So
Hey,
I came in the
congratulations.
middle of Thank you
Congratulations.
very, very much. You don't understand. I
Hey,
didn't think I was going to be able to see a grandson. So I started partying early before I got on this call. And as soon as I gained consciousness, guess what? I got me something to eat and I jumped in my car.
Mm.
I don't miss it. I love this thing, man. I love this. This is my spiritualist. But I can't key in on everything because I just seen the butt end of it. But from what I hear, everybody goes through experience. Every time I hear somebody on these calls, I've been through there. I just turned 46 the 25th of February. And 46, I said, right? I'm pretty sure I said 46. I just turned 46.
It all goes downhill at a certain point, my man. Don't worry.
I didn't know. Believe me, I know. So I listen and I've been through it in a different part of my life. And if I had this group then, I think I would have became a better person. I am the best person I could be now based on my circumstances, but I would have been a better person if I would have had the capacity to at least talk to somebody, say hi, release some of this out so somebody can comment and at least you have a different point of view other than your own. This is true story for me. I can't talk for everybody else, but for me, I love every moment of that I spend of this hour to talk to you brothers.
thank you, Elvin. We appreciate you. Keith, you have anything you want to say, or Laurent? Dishay turned his camera off.
I'm sorry, Uncle Mike. No, I was just listening, and I think this is good conversation. I do think that, as like most of the brothers have said, that most of the times we're taught to not really express ourselves in a vulnerable manner, or we have been trained to feel like we come across as weak. But for my son, I'm trying to do the opposite of that. To an extent. Like I do want him to have a backbone, but also I try to pull out and let him talk anything he may be feeling and not let him hold it in, and allow him to be vulnerable, at least at home. So I think it comes with just a change in generation and change of perspective, and it starts from us, and kind of moves forward with the next generation. So no, I think this is a good conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
Thank
Keith,
you.
I want to say something based on what you just said too. So little kids up to about the age of 3 or 4, if they show emotions, they often get the same response. Like a little boy or a little girl up to about 3 or 4 years old, like if they hurt themselves and they start crying, what do? It's okay. We comfort them, right? And around 5 or 6 years old, that message changes. For little girls, we keep saying that. It's okay. All right. Don't worry about it. You can cry it out. But boys start hearing a very different message. What are the things they start hearing?
Be a big boy.
Toughen up.
Be a big
Don't
boy,
be a
toughen
girl.
up.
Don't be a girl.
The worst insult for a little boy, an 8, 9-year-old boy, is don't be a girl, right? It's things like rub some dirt on it, suck it up. And so the message they hear is, oh, wait, I can't have these emotions because that's not what I see the men in my life or what the men in my life are telling me. And so they unconsciously start to go, oh, I can't do that. And it's like tightening the screws on a pressure cooker, right? There's one more thing I can't do. I love sports. I played sports growing up, but so many messages I heard growing up, right? I saw a guy playing football. His ankle got turned 90 degrees from the direction it should be. Now, I can't even imagine that pain. I would be just screaming. And the first thing the coach said is, hey, suck it up. Don't cry. And I'm like, at the time, that seemed absolutely normal. Like right now, it'd be like, are you kidding me? Like if you felt that pain, coach, do you think you would sit there quietly? And so that's part of what I'm talking about too. And what we're discussing here is like, it's not about either or thinking. And that's what kind of that old school. And let me be clear. I am not saying we need to throw out what it means. There's some great stuff about being a man, but it's also a lot of either or thinking. Either I can be strong or I can ask for help. Either I can be a breadwinner or I can be a caregiver. And what I believe is it needs to be both and. So what does it mean to be strong and independent? and know that sometimes I can't do it all and I need to ask for help and not feel shame for doing it. What does it mean to be a breadwinner and also come home and be a caregiver and not be seen as less than because of it, right? But so much of our culture paints us in this, it has to be either or, right? And that's part of what these conversations help is, again, I can't change, I can't rebuild a motor. Does that make me less of a man? I don't think it does. But if that's the standard by which we're judging a man, then I fail on all accounts. I can change my oil, but that ain't enough. And so how do we expand the way we hold what it means to be a man without throwing others out because they don't meet it? Because right now we have this very narrow, like, if you're not this alpha male doing certain things, you're not a real man, whatever that is. So I'm gonna stop talking for a second and like, let me hear what's coming up for y'all as I say that. Paul.
I just gotta say, what you said really highlighted something so important for me. I remember years ago I was watching this UFC fight, and it was Manuel Noriega, and he was in an armbar, and you could tell he was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And at that point, he was defeated. He had no way out. And in my mind, I'm like, he's got to tap. Like he's got to tap out. And instead of tapping, his opponent broke his arm.
Yeah.
You literally watch his arm snap on national TV, and I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And he's a father. He has kids. He gets up with a broken arm. His arm is dangling, and he's looking in the camera. He has like a straight face, and he's like, I was strong. I didn't tap. And I was like, are you shitting me? And I'm like, this dude is, I'm thinking this as a parent. I'm like, yo, you're a father. You now have one less arm. You have already made millions, and your ego got the best of you. And I was like, just the environment where I'm like, you know how many great fighters tapped and they're still considered great.
Yeah.
And so just this idea as men, like, we have to be these juggernauts, these unstoppable forces and like you said, at all times, right? So, and so many of us don't learn to live in both worlds. And I've learned, because I have two girls, and I've learned, like, my mom growing up, she always kind of instilled that sensitive side. I was like, yo, it's okay to cry, right? And I remember it's growing up, because you just unearthed something for me where it was okay for me to cry if I lost a baseball game. Like, everyone said that was cool. You lost the championship, I'm crying. Everyone's like, nah, it's okay, man.
But probably just for a little while, and then you got to move on. Yeah.
But if I was riding my bike and fell and scraped my knee, I'm like, if I got hurt, whatever. Everyone's like, yo, tough it up. Yo, stop being a bitch. Like, and so this weird dichotomy, right? And I'm so grateful for this group, because we get to unearth these things. And I think somebody else said it before. It's just like, I don't know where I'd be. I mean, I know where I'd be. I'd probably still be in that same mindset. But I'm just so thankful for this group. I'm gonna stop talking now.
Well, here's what I want to just emphasize on what you said there before we jump to Puma. That example of Noriega. Now think about the guy that's watching and goes, man, like, I'm just struggling with like a little bit of back pain. How can I complain about that and say that it's bothering me when this man had his arm broken, right? So it also sets his bar of like, well, if this man isn't willing to give up there, how can I with my thing that isn't even compared? So it just perpetuates it, right? Yeah. Puma, what you got?
Oh man, thanks again for being here. And what year did you serve in the Marines?
I was in from 96 to 2006.
Thanks for your service, man. Thank you, man. I'm like my brother from Eastern York, Tyrone. I was in the Air Force for 8 years myself.
Thank you.
But so back on this topic here. So a couple of things I was thinking. One thing, we got to redefine what vulnerability is. We redefined it. You know, it's that nature versus nature thing. And I think we need balance with this, because I'm born in the 60s. So when Paul told that story, I'm saying, damn right, he should have not tapped out.
Right.
That's where I came from. He did the right thing, but not tapping out based on the nurturing he came from.
Right.
The nurturing. But as America and the country is changing, to me, it got to be balanced, though. This is what I'm saying. So now they're letting the kids say, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. That's out of balance to me. Out of balance. You're going all the way over from, you can't be soft, but now I'm gonna go always to be I'm gonna be a girl. So it's gotta be balanced to me. But I also see in the NFL, I saw a player miss a playoff game to go see his baby be born.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? And then last week, this brother from MVP candidate, what's his name, Joaquin? From the Timberwolves, I think. Anyway, he at halftime, he left the game to go see his kid be born.
Yeah.
So it's starting to change. Anthony Edwards, yes, he's starting to change. But I'm thinking the balance. You know, me growing up, my football coach, he smacked us in the face.
Yeah.
And guess what we didn't do?
You didn't do that again.
And guess what? We never even thought about telling anybody about it.
Yeah.
No mother, no father, no uncle, no older brother. He smacked us in the face.
Yep.
When he put our helmet up, you know what I mean? And we took it as a sign of toughness. And matter of fact, to this day, when we talk to each other, we always reminisce about it in a positive light.
Yeah.
You know? So I just want to say that what do you think about the balance I'm talking about? Because when we going, it's like, to me, it's going so far to the other side sometimes. You need to get in balance. Like, don't beat the boys. Like, let them be vulnerable, let them be sensitive, but don't let them go, oh, I want to be a girl.
Yeah.
So to speak.
It is important. Yeah. Well, and you point to a couple of things. You're right. The balance is important. And that's why I say there's no one right way to do it. But what I really encourage people to do is like, where are you on that? And where do you need to be, right? To really have the impact in the relationships that you have. That's what we got to think at. Because for us as men, most of the time being in that way to the one side is like, I'm invincible, I'm bulletproof, nothing ever hurts me, I have no feelings. Nobody believes that. Your boys don't believe it. They may smile and nod and say, oh yeah, we got you, but they know that ain't true, right? So how do we find that balance? Absolutely. Ron, what you got?
Oh man, there's so much that's coming up. My brother Puma just walked some other thoughts. You know, we all respect each other's opinions, and what I was thinking of when I first raised my hand was what Doug mentioned, kind of growing up, and I was thinking of, because it really sticks out, a scenario that I encountered when I was a teenager. I wasn't even trying to be vulnerable. I grew up in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, and I remember after high school I had seen, you know, a dude from around the PJs, and he said, "Oh, I ain't seen you for a while. Where you been?" And I was like, I said I was, you know, I'm upstate. I was upstate, and then he just went in like he was so proud, and he started talking about this other guy who was in jail, and you know, that he had just talked to him, and he was remembering a fight that we had. Oh, talking about it, he was saying that fight y'all had was the best, and he's like, where were you? I was like, no, I was upstate in school.
Right?
And he looked at me like, did you just come out the closet like in front of me? Like why am I even standing next to you? And I was just like, I felt exactly what, you know, what we're talking about it in terms of just like, not, you can't even share anything that's outside of this very narrow mindset that, you know, way too often it was reinforced with people. And just like, then I remember consciously not even telling people that I was in college when I was, because it just didn't give me the, you know, the positive reinforcement. It was just like, oh,
it didn't give you the street cred, right? You know, in some circles.
Did not give me the street cred. Yeah, but you know, there's so much.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize too in this, not everybody's ready to be in this conversation. Like, I am not going to fool myself and say every man, we need to be talking about this, because there's some guys that just aren't ready for it. Okay. And I'm also not making the guys wrong that came before us, because as I've said a couple times, they were operating off the examples they saw. But what I'm hoping is you all, and it sounds like you are, like starting to think about, how am I showing up and how do I want to show up for the people that are watching me that I'm a role model for? And how do I find that balance, as Puma was talking about? Lauren, what you got?
Actually, can I just say one more thing really quickly? Because something resonated that Paul and Puma were talking about, because I remember watching a boxing match with the Klitschko brothers. I don't know if anybody remembers these, you know, these two dudes. And, you know, I forgot who he was fighting. I just remember, you know, he just refused to come back after the bell, you know, and he took his gloves off, and you know, and his trainer was like, you know, no, put the gloves back on. He's like, And then they interview him afterwards. He getting booed. You know, people are throwing things. He's like, I realized I couldn't win this fight. So I lived to fight another day. And I remember thinking, what a punk this guy is.
Right.
And then as I evolved, it sticks in my mind because I was like, that's a smart dude. Like, why are you gonna get your arm broke? Why are you
Right.
gonna get punched in the face for another 11 minutes
if you
got
know
no
it ain't gonna
chance
go the
to
way you
win?
want, right? Yeah.
So it's an evolution, but
Yeah.
it takes so much to flush out some of the things that we learned young and try to think about it in a more practical approach.
Right. What do they say? Youth is wasted on the young, right?
Absolutely.
Well, and the other thing is you say that too, it makes me like when I was in the Marine Corps, we used to say it's easy to be hard, but it's hard to be smart. Right. I mean, they may say it in other branch military too, but it's like I often think about that because so much of our growing up as young boys, we're taught, oh, you just got like, you got to, it doesn't matter if it's hard, do it. And like, I love that. He's like, I knew I wasn't going to win. Why am I going to get abused further? But look at how we looked at him in the moment. Right. Yeah. Cool. All right, Lauren, what you got?
When you guys were talking about as far as like boys and being soft and things like that, so I'm actually in a situation like that with my son right now. My parents come from Haiti, so my upbringing, I guess, in like the early '90s was kind of like my dad died when I was 4, so my mom pretty much had to play both sides. Um, there was I'd get disciplined, and the minute tears came out my eyes, my mom would just be like, "Stop crying, I'm gonna hit you more." So I feel like what I tell people is, as I grew up, pain for me is not like it's like if I get in a fight, somebody hits me, I'm not gonna sit here and be like, "Oh my God," like it's just all right. You hit me, I'm gonna hit you back. I became a father, and like my son and his me and my son's mother. I don't know. It's weird because she's from Harlem. My mom moved to Bayside, Queens. Like I grew up in the suburbs, so a lot of people used to think like, "Oh, you're from the suburbs. You're soft. You went to Catholic school." And I used to be like, "You'd be surprised the type of people I see in Catholic school. Like I know people that went to Catholic school. I mean that their parents got money and everything. They'll go to the hood and they'll whoop somebody's ass in the hood." So, but it's crazy because like my son's mom, she was like hood, and then she became a mom, and I was just like, "Yo, you're mad soft, bro." And then like we broke up. I had my son like watching basketball. You know, we would just do regular stuff that I knew my dad would have did with me.
Mhm.
The minute like she realized she's mom, she started like having my son watch certain things. And in the beginning, I'll be honest, I was very like, no, like my son's a boy. Why is he watching Beauty and the Beast? Why is he watching Frozen? Like he's a boy. The way I was raised was I'm watching Power Rangers, Ninja Turtles, Mortal Kombat. So I'm in a place with my son where he'll tell me like, Dad, I I like girls, right? So he in his mind, he thinks he has to do like play with girl stuff so girls like him.
Mm.
I have to explain to him like, bro, when you get older, the truth is there might be girls that might be like, "Yo, you're my friend. Like, yeah, you're cool to be a friend, but that's it." And he doesn't understand. So to him, he feels like I'm trying to ruin his childhood. Like, you can't watch Frozen. And I explained to him that you have to understand me and your mom were young when we had you. So your mom didn't understand what it is to be a boy.
Yeah.
In her mind, me and her not together. So she's seeing it as we're watching a Disney movie and my son's happy. She's not seeing it that you're a woman already. He's around you 24/7. And then now you're showing him protagonists that are feminine.
Mhm.
So it doesn't matter if I show my son The Lion King. He's not looking at Simba. It's Nyla. We watch Aladdin. It's not Aladdin. It's Jasmine. And I have to explain to him, like, look, I get it. To you, that's a female. Your mom's a woman. So you're just like, she's beautiful. She's this. But I'll be honest, I'm a little more old school. I was born in 88. I get it. The world's changing. I understand. But kids they're innocent. So it's like, are we really supposed to, like, am I supposed to feel uncomfortable to tell my son, like, you're not playing with that because that's for girls? Like, I feel like as a parent, I shouldn't feel weird telling my son that. And I found myself in situations where I have to tell my kid, like, you're a boy. Like, you can't play with that. But then another parent will be like, well, if that's what and I want to tell them, like, I get it. Like, that's just not my thing. So it's kind of like, I feel like that's the tough part about being a dad in this era.
Yep. Yep.
Because it's like, again, I don't want my son to be out here just being malicious. I want him to understand people have feelings. You can express yourself. It's okay to be sad. You don't always have to be tough. But at the same time, it's like you said, where is the balance? Where's the line where it's like, I can say this and not feel like I'm offending somebody else?
Yep. Yep. And that's part of the challenge we're all dealing with as dads, right? Like, how do you find that line for you? And the other thing, I'm just going to rant for a second about social media, right? Like, everybody puts their picture perfect lives on Facebook and Instagram. We know that isn't reality, but then we get criticized if we're not living up to somebody else's standard or ideal, right? And it's like, I say, no, screw all that noise. Okay, and you saw you had your hand up. Did you want to say something, or I wasn't sure?
No, I'll pass.
Okay.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Cool. Okay. All right, William. I'm loving the conversation, by the way. Thank you, gentlemen. You never know when you come into these. It's like, are they going to be in on it or not? Or it's like, is it going to be crickets? But okay, William, what you got?
Going based off of the balance aspect of the conversation, feel like in life, I was always taught this is chess, not checkers. So if you're thinking about it like that, every move and every emotion and every action you make is based off of the right time and the right place. And with that being said, you really got to pick a lane and figure out if you're attacking or defending, if you're a nature or a nurturer, if if you're gonna have all the money in no time, or if you're gonna have all the time and no money. Because again, that this is all of it is the exact same balance that we're referring to and we're talking about. Me being a girl dad, I really don't know anything about having a son, but I do know that when my daughter wants to paint nails, guess who's getting their toes done and getting their toes painted.
Yep.
But at the same time, I gotta sit here. I respect what you said, Richard, by saying, like, this is not what I do. This is not who I am. So in time, I'll let her paint my nails, but then we'll go play basketball.
Yeah.
So there's that balance that I'm really trying to get that situated with her. As far as protagonists, I agree with everything you said, because right now she's infatuated with Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. And unfortunately, I'm trying to teach her, like, this is not how the world treats you. Everywhere is not Mickey Mouse Clubhouse.
Yeah.
Okay, there's certain ways you got to act, certain ways in Walmart you got to act. You can't throw tantrums. Certain ways in school you got to act. To the point where I see me and her, I kind of roughhouse a little bit so I could show her how to defend herself.
Mm-hmm.
But then I see her roughhousing with her mother, and then that has to stop. I have to put a stop to it immediately. This is how you play with me. This is daddy time. This is what daddy does. You don't do this with your mother at all. You don't put your hands on your mother. You don't tell your mother no. Okay? You feel like you want a roughhouse, you come over here and roughhouse. And yeah, that's how I try to balance all of that, right timing and right place, because I do want to be I know what it's like not to have any of the time. So I want to change that with my life and with my daughter by giving her all the time that I never had.
Yeah.
But obviously I can't do that, because if I did if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be in the position with my job I have now that you guys heard me talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really love this conversation. Thank you for the question.
Yeah. Well, something I want to say in that too is sometimes it can be vulnerable to say to someone else, I don't agree with what you said. And what we often do when we hear that is, oh, so now this is a conflict. Not at all. Guess what? There's people in this world I don't like. And I'm okay with that because there's people that don't like me. But even being willing to say, I don't agree with what you said, and I'm willing to have a conversation with you, that's part of being vulnerable too, right? So like what I love is it can show up in lots of ways. And it's beyond, like, it's us moving just beyond that one narrow way that we look at it. Mike, what you got?
It's a great conversation. Thanks so much, Christopher. I just want to mention that, like we were talking about, that our fathers and the men in generation before us was more or less modeled what vulnerability was all about. And I think of my dad that raised me. I was able to understand that my dad was trying hard to survive. He grew up in a different world. And my grandfather, as a Black man, was trying to survive. There was like no place for vulnerability. So we really have the luxury that we can have these conversations. What they were up against was so different than what I'm up against. And so I'm glad that we can salute them, we can honor them, and understand that we can take it to another level, which is great. So that's my first statement. Then I have a question. And Christopher, we might need you to come back for this one. So my question is, do we feel that the women in our lives are ready for us to be vulnerable?
Oh, that one's going to be a long conversation. So let me say something to the first thing you said, and then we will spend some time on that second piece. I also recognize that, and to what you're saying, Mike, the men that came before us, and I'll even say as men of color, like sometimes walking in the world, there are places where I will not even bring vulnerability because I know I can't, right? Because of lived experience. So I will say again, I am not saying we need to do it everywhere and all the time. Appropriate vulnerability is the term I use. But you're right. Like when I think of 2 generations ago, what our grandfathers and their grandfathers and like we're dealing with, completely different. Like vulnerability probably wasn't even a word in the dictionary back then, or that they would have known. And that's no fault of their own. And I love that you point to, because of what's taken place, like we can have conversations like this. And even though we may not solve it all here, it gives us a chance to kind of be in this conversation and walk away with like, what are we taking from it too? So I love that you bring that in there.
So we can change the narrative,
we can.
We
Absolutely, we
understand
can.
where it's coming from. Yeah.
And even for ourselves, right? Like regardless of what that story was you were given growing up, you have a choice today in how do you want to show up and how do you want to go forward, right? But we often think, oh no, that's the way I was brought up, so that's why I always have to be. We can change, but there has to be a conscious decision to do it. And
I always
changing
ask
doesn't,
myself,
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, and changing doesn't dishonor the people that brought us up or our past either, but it's us choosing how we want to be different going forward.
Perfect. And I always want to find out for myself, is it serving me well? Right.
Yeah.
This was passed down to me, but
Yeah.
is it serving me well? And it probably served them well for the society and the world that they were living in. But
Yeah.
for us now, is it still serving me well?
Yeah.
And because it's not, that's when I have to make some changes.
Yeah. So let me grab Puma and Ron's comments, and then I'm going to come back to your question about the women in our lives, because that's a whole other level that makes this way more complicated. Puma.
Perfect, brother. I'm gonna be very brief with this. Brother Laurent, I want to respond to what you said. And again, being vulnerable in this call, you can say what you say and know you still respect, and we can try to help you as much as we can. What I would say, what I got from what you said, I feel obligated to share with you as a father. Don't feel wrong or funny about what you want to do with your child, because it is your child.
Yep.
And how old is your son?
He's 5. He's gonna be 6 in May.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Well, May what?
May 14th.
On May 15th, brother. Okay. So it's perfect. So listen. So I just want to get off my chest real fast, because I think I want you to hear this from me, because I sometimes I have a hard time articulating my thoughts, But what I want to say to you is that as a father, don't let society make you feel a certain way about how you want to raise your child. Because in reality, society gonna have a hold of your child more than you, but you gotta lay that foundation in him now. He can come back to what my father said, my father said, my father said, my mother said. So you got stuff inside of you can share with love and respect and not anger, so he can receive it properly. So don't hold what you got back and how you want your son to be, because he's gonna be what he's gonna be anyway. But you gotta put your input in, and don't feel like ashamed or scared or weird about saying, I want to make sure he's not doing this. I'm gonna show him more of this. You know, I hope that came out right. You know what I mean? Don't, like, I know it feels uneasy the world we live in today,
Yeah.
but you still gotta do it because you're still a father. It's gonna be your son forever.
So with that being said, there's been a couple times, you know, like I said, I feel like my era, like my age range, like I grew up in that era where it's like I was old school and I kind of grew into the new school. So I know understand both. There's been times I'm with my son, we done took the train. I'll never forget my son seen some guy. He had on pink heels, a pink skirt, pink crop top, pink wig, and a pink bag. My son looked at me, he looked at him, he looked at me, and he's like, Dad. And I was just like, yo, bro, this is why I be trying to explain to you certain things. Like, and in the beginning, you know, and here he comes. He always wants me in the camera. In the beginning, he was kind of like, you know, he didn't understand. And then it's funny that, like, because Uncle Mike and some of the guys in here, they know I was here since 2022, I think. And in the beginning, his mom used to kind of make me feel like we need to be open-minded and this and that. And I was like, look, you work in the West Village. I get it. Like the environment, the demographics of the people you work around, they're going to make you feel like you have to accept this. But I said, at the end of the day, he's our son. Right. So nobody determines how our son's going to be but us. Exactly. But it's like, you can't, like I said in the beginning, she was more lenient about it. She would just be like, "Oh, he's just a kid. You don't understand." And then once he hit like 4 or 5 years old, where he's more expressive, that's where it became, he needs you. You need to teach him this. He needs to, and I'm just like, but when I was telling you in the beginning,
she wasn't hearing it. Yeah,
you wasn't hearing it. You was trying to make me feel uncomfortable and make me feel like, oh, just let him be who he wants to be. And it's like, yes, I'm gonna let him be who he wants to be, but I also have to train him, because at the end of the day, look, if my son decided that's what he wants for his future, that's cool. But I want him to also understand there's certain consequences. I don't even want to say consequences, certain obstacles he's gonna have to deal with. So do you want to deal with those obstacles? Yep. Or do you want to live how you see I'm living? I go to work, I'm a man, like my hands get dirty. I'm not staying here worried about a little cut. Like when my son says, "Oh, daddy, I need a Band-Aid." I'm like, bro, my mom would have told me, you put the Band-Aid on, when you're going to sleep, take it off, it needs to air out. Like that's it, it's a little cut and it's over. Yeah. But with him, like the one thing I tell people is that becoming a dad kind of taught me patience, because again, like you all said, we grew up in an era where emotion and expressing yourself was not really common. Right. So I have to explain to my son a lot that you're actually very privileged. And I don't mean in financial sense, I mean emotionally, because what you get to do with me and your mom couldn't do it. Like there was no, I'm upset and I want to tell you why I'm upset. It was just like, you can't be upset. You're a kid. That's it. I told you what to do. You do what I say and keep it pushing. Yep. So I try to give him, with the whole balance thing and William, I've thought about, you know, I have a girlfriend now, because I think the next topic is talking about the women in our life. The woman I'm with now compared to my son's mother, like she's way more aggressive. Like she has my mentality where it's like a boy's a boy, a girl's a girl. Like there's no in between. But then I think to myself, like if I had a daughter, I'm with William. I'm gonna do what he said. Like I'm doing the tea parties. You wanna paint my nails, paint my nails. But again, like he said too, like there has to be a balance. So it's like you want to make sure your daughter is also tough. So that's why I feel like it's the problem. it's not really about being a man or a woman. It's more about making sure like they know they gotta be a certain way to protect themselves at the end of the day.
Part
Because
of what you're pointing to here, Lawrence, is like our world is changing. And how do we shift to meet it, right? Because what we grew up with is different than now. Yeah. Let me jump to
So,
Ron.
so we have an interest on the interest of time. We have 3 more comments.
Yeah.
And I know my brothers will make it nice and right to the point.
You're so polite about that, Mike.
So we can wrap it up on time. Thank you, brothers.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Yeah, I think it's a great conversation. One of the things I picked up from a previous call was, you know, we were talking about raising a boy versus raising a girl, and the comment that stuck in my mind was like, why are we not just focused on raising good people? And it kind of doesn't necessarily go into, you know, wearing pink or wearing blue, and again, to kind of emphasize what Puma said, the way that everybody decides to raise their children is completely, you know, at their discretion, and that's something that I certainly respect. I kind of look at it in a different way, and some from some perspectives, which is like, kids are going to be who they're going to be, regardless of what we decide we want for them. And I think that sometimes we can find ways to suppress certain things. But I think we need to also be aware of, you know, we're in different times, and there's a lot of suicide. And personally, I'd prefer to have a happy child wearing whatever color he or she decides to wear and live life to the fullest, versus on the other extreme where kids feel like they can't express themselves and they can't be who they feel like they are, and then they take a different route. I'm just saying, it's just something to think about, because that's also part of the world we live in, and we just gotta focus, you know, from my opinion, you know, on just raising good human beings, and I think that when we see a lot of these examples, and like D Wade and his daughter kind of comes to mind as this basketball player, this Hall of Famer, who has this child who has decided that the gender that was assigned at birth is not the gender that they want to go through the rest of their lives with. And I'm just like, that's a hell of a lot of vulnerability, because that could be really tough. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Just my thoughts.
Well, and I just want to say it requires vulnerability from us to deal with some of the things that we're dealing with that our parents had no idea they needed to have these conversations around too, right? So give yourselves some grace in this too.
Joaquin.
Yeah, I'll make this very long. Nah, man, I'll be forgetting this so much. I mean, I just appreciate everybody's vulnerability, man, and just sharing the different stuff. But what came up for me was how I shared this not too long ago. Was when I was my son was living with me at the time. He was in maybe high school, and he laid his head on my lap, and he was just on the couch. We're on the couch together. He laid his head on his lap, and he was. It made me feel so uncomfortable. So freaking uncomfortable. And I was like, and it's not a conscious decision. I just didn't know how to be vulnerable or give him or be vulnerable with him in that moment. Give him the love that maybe his mother, you know what I mean, would have done, hugged him. And I remember being so uncomfortable. So fast forward a couple of weeks ago, Ishmael gave us a challenge. He asked a question, how would you feel if you got flowers from a man? You know what I mean? So I took that challenge and I gave flowers to a friend of mine, George, on his birthday, 6'10", 280 pounds. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try it. And so I grew up in the projects, South Jamaica projects, worked 25 years on Rikers Island. Like my path has not been the one of softness. You know what I mean?
That's not one where you would normally send a man flowers, right?
Right, exactly. So here I am, you know, practicing being soft and vulnerable, and come that way. It has nothing to do with my sexuality, has nothing to do with me being soft
Yep.
or weak is actually empowering. And we have that both in us. So I know like there's a fear that we all have as men. We don't want our kids to be gay. Don't conflict the two. Being sensitive and being vulnerable has nothing to do with sexuality. It's not going to make your kid gay. It's
Absolutely.
not going to happen. So for me, now I've explored them late in life. I wish I had time to do it over, but I know that I can give both. I can be sensitive, I can be loving, I can be soft for change. That's my natural state, is to be soft. And I'm realizing how powerful that is. And I get, with the kids, might have grandkids, and shit, sometimes they dress up. When the kids come to my house here, they freaking my wife got a whole nail thing, and they paint their nails. The boys too. They paint their nails. They play with the girls. They do all that stuff. And the older me or younger me might have been like, oh. Now I'm like, they put nails and paint and shit on, and they forget about it 2 days later.
Yep.
They're all playing, doing their boy stuff.
Yep.
So I would say for us, it's hard to watch that because of where we come from and what we think it's related to. And Ron said it best, man. Like, they're gonna be, it's crazy. You're gonna raise your kids to be what you want them to be. They're not gonna be that. And you can ask people right here, how many of us have done what our parents, how many of us have even done, get with the girl or boy that our parents wanted us to be with? Like, it just doesn't work that way. So I think, like, let them be, and don't think that because they're kids and they're dressing up in tutus that they're going to be gay or it's going to make them weak. Nah, just embrace them as they are. They're going to be fine when they grow up, and just love them, man. Yeah. And I'm telling you, learning and experiencing vulnerability, like it's a figure superpower that we have as men, especially Black men, because we suppressed it. So when we do open up and embrace it, it becomes so powerful to use, to connect, and to heal people around us. So yeah, man, just lean into it. Brother, I thank you for this conversation. And it was amazing, man. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I hope we do get to, have you here again.
Thank you, Joaquin. You always dropping those gems. Doug, you have like a half a minute.
Yeah, I'm short. I'm just gonna. This is for Laurent, and it's just food for thought. I would like to say, at those movies that you don't care for your son watching, I would say to revisit them and watch it with him, and after the movie, have a conversation with him about the movie to desensitize it, but then keep the bond with him and be able to communicate and let him hear how your father feels, and ask him how he feels and why he feel like that. So you get better understanding of each other. And that's it. I'm short. And thanks to our speaker, Christopher. Yeah. Very, very powerful topic on vulnerability, brother.
Yeah. Thank you,
Christopher. We can't thank you enough for being with us. As you see, you just got us engaged and inspired, and it's been great having you. And we do look forward to having you again. And you have any last words you want to say as we close out this evening with these amazing men on this call?
I think the number one thing I want to say is just gratitude. Like, thank you all for showing up and being in the conversation and sharing what's going on for you. That's what I love, is you don't have to show up and be some version of you that you think we want you to be. So that's what I love. Like, the more of these conversations happen, the better our world becomes. I'm gonna remind you, there's no one way to be vulnerable. Find what it means for you and then keep leaning into it. Look for opportunities to go first. I say give somebody the gift of going second. So you being willing to be a little bit vulnerable creates an invitation for others to come and do the same. And even if it's not well received, that's not about you. So if you show a little bit of vulnerability and that guy goes, "Ooh, no," that's nothing you did wrong. He's just at a different place in his journey. So remember that, because that's a lesson it took me a long time to learn. And the last thing I want to share, I'm going to put two things in the chat. There's a documentary called The Mask You Live In. I highly recommend you watch it. It talks about some of the ways that we send these messages to young boys about kind of what it means to be a man in that man box way. And a man by the name of Shanti Branch does this amazing activity with high school boys where they like talk about masks. So check that out. You can like Google it, or it's on YouTube, I think. And then there's this other one that I found. It's about 4 or 5 minutes long by a spoken word artist named Guante, called 10 Responses to the Phrase Man Up. And it's short, and I love it because it kind of talks to some of the things that we're talking about here. Thank you all for your openness. Thanks for having me here and welcoming me into this conversation too. I appreciate you leaning in.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, brothers.
Thank you.
Thank you, brothers. Love you all. I love you, brothers. It's been great.
Love y'all too, brothers.
Love y'all. Love you.
Let's go.
Love you, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks.
Don't forget to stop the recording, Mike.
How can we find?